Okay. Hello. So this class will be on something which is called community modulus. Usually it's written like this, modulus, and if you're more, more rigorous, it would be community moduli, which is in Latin for the plural. But anyhow, modulus is usually. So, okay, that is here. It's chalk. So, and we already saw one. Okay? It's everything okay? Yeah. So we saw, okay, so that's community modulus. And we saw one, okay? So which was resource consumer 1, consumer 2, and we draw. What is this something from what? It's outside. Okay, I hope it stops. Okay. So we saw this. This is what this community models are. Certain small number of species involved, but not only two. Okay, so this is called a modulus. They have usually some names. So this is exploitative. They have competition. So, why are... Okay, let me be first descriptive. Let me draw some others, and then I will discuss why we studied these things, okay? So, one which is pretty much obvious is if you have a resource and there is some consumer 1, let's say, predator 1, and then there's another predator here, predator 2. So, or if you want consumers and so on. So this is called a food chain. Okay. So the dynamics which comes from such a food chain, it can have many kinds of models that model the food chain. For instance, a strict name from food chains would be that this is the only feeding process. That there's something here which there's a dynamic from that gives you the resource, and then this feeds on this, and this feeds on this, and nothing else. So this is a very strict definition. But usually you have something else. You have usually something like maybe this here. Okay, has also some other resource 2, and maybe okay. This resource also has the other resources. Okay, here, and maybe this one could also have other connections. Maybe there's a super predator, or there are other resources, and so on. Okay, so. Depending on the situation that you are interested, then you will say, okay, I don't want to model everything. You know, food chains have thousands of species, okay, normally, okay. So unless it's sometimes in Arctic regions, very cold regions, the food chains are small, and so there's a lot of studies about food chains in very okay, to some extent, species poor regions, not so many species that can study food chains easier. So, but yeah, okay, maybe you want an I don't want to model all the time that I have a food web. That's a web, okay? Because then there could be other lots of connections. So it's not anymore a chain, it's a web. Okay? So this is not anymore what we call a community modulus. It is a food web. Okay? So, but you can say, okay, I want to focus on something like this here. Maybe I know by some information, by some accessory information, that this is the main part of it's a very important part of the food web. Okay? Then I could just simply say, okay, this guy here feeds on something, so this is something I don't want to put in the model, and therefore I will make this guy here have an intrinsic growth rate, okay, and with some carrying capacity. So the intrinsic growth rate and the carrying capacity take into account all the rest which interacts with this guy. Okay. And well, this here, you could say, okay, do I need to take into account resource 2? Or, okay, so depends. If this guy has a preference for, strong preference for the resource 1, then maybe this here is just modeled as an intrinsic growth rate in the absence of the resource 1. Okay, so this could be a switching thing. Okay, so then you have to know the biology of your species. Okay, and this here you can also try to model. Maybe the superpredator is really regulating, then you have to have the superpredator. But here maybe the other resources also give you some carrying capacity and some intrinsic growth rate in the absence of the P1. Okay? So you see there are many models that you can build around the food chain with the elementary food chain here. Okay? So, okay. Let me, well, then you have the situation where you have a predator and you have 2 prey, N1 and N2. Okay? So let me see. What do you think will happen in this kind of situation? Okay. So where's the mic? Where's the mic on? The mic. Okay. Yeah. Somebody has an idea. Okay.
Probably the predator has some preference, then one of the other species will go down, and when this got down, the predator will turn to the other because will be with a lack of the first one that has preference, and it will make the other growth again and then return. So we'll probably be alternating being done.
So this depends on supposing that there's strong preference for one of them, for instance. That could be, yes. More ideas. So, okay, let me put the question like, what if N1, for some reason, because they're feeding on something here, okay? We are not modeling where they are feeding upon, okay? Say N1 increases, what happens? P increases, and N2 decreases, and vice versa. If this increase, okay, then say you try to observe the species, but you didn't find the predator. This one increases, this one decreases, and vice versa. It's like competition, okay? But there's no competition, okay? So this is apparent competition. Okay.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm just having a hard time understanding because, in my point of view, if anyone increases, okay, the predator would increase, but it wouldn't he predate more and one and let and two increase a little bit.
Okay, if it a very strong, okay, I'm not supposing that there is a very strong preference in this case. Okay. So that he can prey on both, okay? There can be preference, but not to such a point that the predator would not prey on N2, okay? But in fact, that the number of predators increase, there will be more predation on this guy, okay? Even if it had some preference, okay? So on extreme cases, maybe this could not work, but in principle, yes, what you have is an apparent competition, and you see this sometimes in nature. Yeah? And I will give you an example, I don't know, if today or on Friday. So then there's another one which I already mentioned, where you have a resource, you have a consumer 1, and you have a consumer 2. Okay? We know already the outcome of this modulus is the exclusion of of one of them, okay? So the best competitor, in the sense that the best consumer here will prevail, and the other one will be eliminated. That's what we discussed when we have one resource and two consumers yesterday. Okay? So, and we have even written down a rule. That was the R. Okay, this is gone. The R rule. Okay, so we define at the resource level one star. What was the resource in the absence of competitor 2? The equilibrium between C1 and R corresponds to a certain level of R1. Okay, then you had the same thing for R2, and if R1 is smaller than R2, this one wins. Okay, so it is able to be in equilibrium with the resource at lower levels of resource. Right? So this is the R rule. Okay? So there's always competitive exclusion. But now say you have something else. You have you have the C2 is able to consume C1. Okay? So that can be the case in many circumstances, that they are competing, but there's one of them is able to prey upon the other. Okay, and usually this is in many situations this is the case where the predation is on different stages of C1. For instance, it's preying the eggs, but not preying the bird or something. Okay. So this is called intra-guild predation. And the name comes from the fact that if they both prey upon this guy, then they form a guild, and this is intra-guild predation. Okay? So this can be the case that you could have coexistence maybe here. If this guy here consumes a lot of this guy, so it regulates him, okay, and doesn't allow doesn't allow a very strong increase of C1, and so C1 is bounded, so cannot maybe could not exclude the one. Okay? So we will discuss this in a moment. So then there are models which mixed, like resource, super predator, okay, consumers like this, It's called sometimes the diamond modulus, because it looks at that diamond, but this is predation upon competing consumers. Okay, it doesn't have an elegant name. Like, what diamond maybe? It's a nickname. So, well, and here you have many possibilities. It depends on what you assume about of them, if they are specialists or not specialists, generalists, many things that can happen. Okay, very good. Let me take a glass of wine, of water. Oh, that's not okay. Okay, so let us study one of those of this modulus, and we will study the intraguild predation. Okay, we won't study all of them because it's a little bit repetitive. When you see how to do the write these equations, then I'm sure that if we study intraguild predation, I can tell you. You will be able to do the apparent predation. It's the same technique, the same reasoning. Yeah.
Yeah. In this case that you showed us,
which one?
This intraguild predation. To happens the coexistent, in this case, the R1 star should be bigger than the R2, right? Then the C2 will regulate C1.
Yeah, we will see it. Okay. It depends that we will find the conditions for coexistence, which are only necessary but not sufficient. Okay. And we will have an interpretation. Just a minute. Okay. So we want to write some equations and get some result that seems okay. Okay. So sure, if we already can imagine that if C2 is the best competitor and still preys upon C1, C1 loses completely, okay? We'll get the elimination of C1. You don't need even to write an equation for that, okay? So the interesting case is when the best competitor is the prey of the predator, okay? But competition here is not given by Lotka-Volterra. It is given by the resource competition, explicit consumer resource competition. Yeah. So when is competition important? When the resource is not abundant. So for small levels of resource, okay, competition can be important. Okay? But at high level of resources, competition may be not so important, and the predation may be important. So there's a balance between the predation and the competition here. So, so we will write down the equations for resource So the name that these guys have here is, this is the resource, this is the intra-guild prey. Okay? And the direction here is the direction of consumption always. Okay? And this is the intra-guild predator. This is R, and I will call this guy here, the prey will be N, and P for predator, okay? Well, the resource. Well, we expect it to be some like R times some 1 minus R over K, okay? That's logistic, okay? And then I will suppose simply that minus N minus P. Okay, let me put a bar, it's better. Okay. So, that is just this term is logistic growth, R times N. This is Lotka-Volterra-like thing, okay, like Holling type 1, a functional numerical response, and here also, okay. So, for the intra-guild prey, so there will be some it preys upon the resource, okay, so it consumes the resource. Then you had A, N here, there should be some conversion factor, A times B times N. This is what, times R. Okay, that's just the conversion of certain amount of resources giving rise to increase in the number of the integral prey with some conversion factor, which is B. Okay. Well, that's not all of the life of this guy, so it has a natural death rate, and it also it has there's a predation there's predation, so there will be alpha n times p minus some natural death rate, okay, which I call m. Okay, are all the terms clear? Okay, so I can repeat it's logistic growth and consumption of resources by n and by p. Here you have growth of the integral prey depends on the resource, and then there's a term that will represent the depletion, the decrease of dn dt due to the presence of the predator, which we will write in a moment here, and this is the natural death rate. Okay? So then here, we'll just do something like that. There's some p, and then the same thing. You have r bar times b, some b bar, okay, conversion factors like r, plus something which is n times p, so for instance n, that's the alpha and some beta as conversion factor, minus some natural death rate m bar. Okay? So we have the equations, and now we want. There is a question. There's a question online. Okay.
Yeah. Why we are using a logist-like approach to model the resource and not the A?
I could have done it.
Okay.
I could have done the other way around also. I could have used the chemostat form. Okay, so it's chemostat is more when you have a controlled situation, and this is a more wild situation. So, but the results would still be true. I mean, I'm not saying that the situation, this in here, and it will be exactly the same if I use the form I used yesterday here, right? But the conditions for coexistence will be the same, because we know that this term, together with the Lotka things and so on, could induce oscillations somehow in some regime. Okay? And we saw yesterday that with the other term here, the chemostat term, we had no oscillations. It was nice. Okay? So okay. So what do we do? What do we do? The only thing we know, fixed points. So what we want to see is when is it possible to have coexistence? Right? Necessary conditions. So stable coexistence. Therefore, there should be a fixed point where R, N, and P are all of them. All the three are different from 0 at equilibrium. Right? That's coexistence. Okay? So we want to see if there is possibly coexistence. Okay? So, okay, so when you look for the fixed points, then you will be interested in putting this equal to 0, but anyhow, let's start with these, because remember yesterday, this here was not so interesting as these other ones, okay? And I just want the condition, okay? So, a necessary condition. So here, this one will give you what? Will give you some R star, okay? So, here, which will be equal to, okay, it's easy that it should be some m plus alpha p star, okay, divided by a times b. Right? So I would call this, this here will give you a similar thing, that R star will be something like m minus alpha beta n star over AB. So, then I would have to use this one, and then I have three equations which would have R star, P star, and N star. Right? But I don't want to do this, because here comes a little trick. Okay? So we know for sure that this here, okay, is this one is for sure bigger than, okay? It's m over AB plus something. So this is, and here we show that for sure this is smaller than m star over AB, okay? Because these are negative, okay? These are tricks to avoid calculations. All of this is bar, okay? Sorry. And I forgot some bars, okay? In this one here, okay? So, now, let us suppose that P is not present. P is 0. Then you can have equilibrium between the resource and the integral prey. And this equilibrium will correspond to some level of resources and some value for n, okay? But, so, which I will call like this, okay? So if P is not present, okay, then the R index n, if you look at this, P is equal to 0, then this is equal to m over AB. Now, if the prey is not present, okay, then the equilibrium of this is 0 and the R index P is equal to m bar over A bar over B bar. Yeah? Is this okay? So I'm excluding either the prey or the predator. And I am finding then if I exclude the predator, then I have equilibrium between R and N, and the resource of value of the equilibrium will be this one with P equal to 0, right? Which is M over AB. And vice versa. If I exclude the prey, then I have the predator in equilibrium with the resource and at a certain level, which is given by this. Okay, but now you see that R star, which we calculated here, has to be bigger than R star N, but smaller than R star P. You agree? That's necessary condition for coexistence. Right? I can repeat. What we obtained here, that R star is equal to this and equal to this, which is not overdetermined because you don't know P and N. You will, in order to have this value, you will have to use this one. Okay, it's a longer calculation. I'm just noticing here that this equilibrium value of R in the presence of both is this. This is just the fact that here you have something added, so this is bigger than M over AB, and here it is smaller. Okay? Okay, then I rewrite, then I look again and I say, remember, yesterday we introduced these R stars. Okay? What did we do? We exclude one of them. Okay? So no predator. Therefore you have an equilibrium between prey and resource. And we calculated the equilibrium value. Okay? And what we got is that, the equilibrium value is M over AB, which can be seen here also, just putting a P equal to 0. Right? If we exclude the prey from, then I do the analogous reasoning for the case where the prey is excluded, so there's no N here, so the resource and the predator will be in equilibrium, and the resource will have this value at equilibrium. Okay, so now I just look like here, and I see that R star is bigger than M over AB. Okay, so R star has to be bigger than M over AB, which happens to be the R star index N. And here it has to be smaller than this, which happens to be the R star index P. Okay? So there's a condition which is necessary for coexistence. I'm not saying that there always will be coexistence, okay? Because this can depend pretty much on the values of the parameters. You could have still elimination because it's not sufficient, okay? But it's necessary. And what can we see from this? So yesterday, we saw that if you had two consumers and one resource, and we introduced the R star 1 and R star 2, and if we had this one wins the competition. It's the best competitor here is this one. It has the smaller value of R. Okay? So here, what you have, if you forget this, this is the integral prey R star, and this is the integral predator R star. Therefore, the prey is the best competitor. If I didn't have if I didn't have the full modulus, okay, if I didn't have the predation here term, if I didn't have the predation term, then the predator and prey, these are the consumers there, okay? Okay? If I don't have, it falls back to this. Okay? So in order to have coexistence, the integral prey it has to be the one that would win the competition in the absence of predation. Okay? So, and therefore, the best competitor has to be the one that is consumed. Okay? It's the prey. The predator, the integral predator, is not the best competitor for the resource. And this creates a balance. And then you can have coexistence. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm a bit confused about this because M and M bar, A bar, B and B bar are different values, right?
Yeah.
So how can we gather these two sentences like R star, P is bigger than R star?
Okay, so let's calculate. If we eliminate P, okay, so we don't have it. We have just N and R, which is a consumer resource thing. Okay, so then what will be the equilibrium between N and R? Okay, so this gives you an equilibrium value for the resource with only prey, which is, if you want, you can look at this equation, okay, without this term, which will give M over A over B. Okay. Okay? Or a shortcut is, okay, this P should be 0 because it's 0 by definition because no prey and no predator is there. Okay? So this is the equilibrium resource level for equilibrium with only prey. Okay? Therefore, I put the N here. Okay? And now do the same reasoning. Supposing there's no prey here. There's only the predator and the resource. It's again a consumer resource relation. And I do the same reasoning. In order to find the resource level at equilibrium, I put the N equal to 0 here. It gives me R star index P equal to M bar over 8 bar B bar. Okay? This here. But now, we had shown this inequalities here. Okay? But this happens just to be R index N, R star index N, and this is R star index P. Okay? Yeah? So what you need here is that R star has to be bigger than this guy, therefore it has to be bigger than this. And R star has to be smaller than this guy, okay? Here, which is this.
But my question is because both R stars are different. One is without prey.
You don't know?
No?
These are stars?
Yeah.
You did not put the P and the N. There is still another relation, which comes from here, okay? So the equilibrium here, which will be implied by this, would be R times 1 minus R star over K, okay? Minus A N star minus A bar P star equal to 0, okay? So then you could say, okay, I can use this one to solve for P star in terms of R star. Okay? So I put it here. So P goes here. And then if you want, you can also solve for this in terms of R star. You get an equation for R star here, which will be a little bit more complicated. I don't want to solve it now, okay? But there is a solution that such this one is equal to this one because P and N here have not been determined. Okay? They will be equal at the end because P and N are such that they will be equal. Okay? Because this is a system of 3 equations for 3 variables. Linear system, algebraic linear system with 3 equations which is this side, and this term is equal to 0, and you have P star, N star, and R star. I'm just not very much interested in N star and P star, because I wanted only to see the necessary condition for coexistence. We won't do a full study of this thing, okay? Why? Because this is much more complicated, okay? So, but what we can do some intuitive thing, because the best competitor has to be the prey, okay? But, well, then you expect that, well, if the resource is very abundant, which would be depend on K, okay, it's and R and K, super abundant, then competition will not be so important. And then you expect that the prey could eventually eliminate, the integrate predator could eliminate the prey, because the competition would not be very important. And vice versa. Now, if competition is very strong, because say the carrying capacity is very small, for the resource, it's a poor environment, then what you expect, that competition has will be much more important than predation, and then you expect that the prey will eliminate the predator, and at the end will be in equilibrium with the resource, and then at some intermediate value you expect to have the equilibrium. You raise your hand, or yeah.
Okay, you were saying that if resources are abundant, then competition is not that important, and then the predator can eliminate the prey. But if you have abundant resources, both of them feed on the resource, so predation would be that important?
Yeah, okay. This will depend also on the conversion factors, okay? In the sense that how fast will be the increase of the, if there could be different time scales, and okay, resources are abundant and the prey maybe increases much faster than the predator and gets to higher levels, okay, and then even it could find an equilibrium, okay. So it depends. That's why I'm not, I mean, doing this would take the classes until tomorrow, okay. So I'm just trying to show you, to figure out what this kind of modulus represents. It represents the possibility of coexistence and integral predation modulus, but I'm not saying, I just found a necessary condition. I didn't find a sufficient condition. And that's, I mean, it's in papers and so on, okay?
Okay, and like I was wondering, because like in this case we are modeling like specialist species, and weren't we telling like yesterday that if you have like 2 species that like predate for like one resource, it wouldn't be possible to have like a big competition? No.
Yes, but
so. How would we like have the weak competition in this?
Weak competition in this case is this guy here is very. I mean, there's a lot of abundant thing and abundance for the resource, and if there were no predation, okay, then there would be one of them that would win the competition, which would be in this case the prey, okay, but there's predation, okay? So the results is modified, okay? So that there can be coexistence, but you expect a little bit like competition to be more important in poor environments, okay? But as I said, you can also maybe find time scales. If the increase of the prey is very fast, then maybe it gives you complicated dynamics and so on. Yeah? So, very good. Now, now let's look for experimental results in the lab with mites. Okay? Mites. Everybody know what's a mite? I didn't know it before I had the. This is ácaros in Portuguese, I don't know. Okay, and I don't know in Spanish, but I guess it will be something similar, yeah. Okay, so mites, okay? And well, so this is a result from people that actually I know, well, the André de Roos group, which actually I showed you a book from André de Roos here on ontogenetic shifts and so on, okay. But okay, so they did an experiment with mice, and it is a little bit different from this, a little bit, but it's in a sense, essentially it is, because remember, okay, so what they do, they have what they call an arena, where they put some food, which is pollen, and then you have two species of mites, and they are separated. They grow for some time, and then the barrier is removed, and then you have the competition, but you also have one of them predating on the other. Okay, so the species were chosen such that it is an integral predation situation. Okay, and then they followed for some time and tried to see if at least the predictions in general from intra-build predation modulus would be verified or not. Right? Okay. So let me find the paper. Is it? Oh, okay, here. Okay. So, let me just show the results. Okay, this is not the one I want. Yeah. So they put a level of resources such that the prey can be in equilibrium with the resources only. So they eliminated the predator, and they made a preliminary experiment to see if the predator can be in equilibrium with the resources. But they found a level of resources such that the predator cannot be in equilibrium. So where comes this? This comes from yesterday. There, before coming to the discussion about the error stars, there were a condition that for the existence of, for the viability of both species, which was something R bigger than M at a certain point yesterday. Okay, so this means what? But you have to have enough resources such that the level of resources creates increased term for the consumers such that they overcome their natural death rate. Right? So what they did is find this kind of. So they feed pollen every 2 or 3 days. I don't remember now. It's somewhere there. And what they obtained is, okay, high pollen supply, okay? So with high okay, sorry, I made a mistake. Predator needs the high pollen supply, not the intermediate. And then, okay, needs high pollen supply. So, okay. So what you find is high pollen supply. This here is integral prey being eliminated by integral predation. Okay. Again, and here's something and not very well defined. Okay. I mean, this guy is going away, and well, the other one will probably prevail. So this is opposite to the first three. Okay. So, but I mean, this is an experiment with n equal to 4. Okay. So it's not very. So we just want. Maybe here's something here, but particularly at this experiment that was different, maybe because there are heterogeneities in the populations that are not taken into account when we model these things, like fitnesses or the individuals where just by chance you get a weaker population. Okay? So, but this is okay. I mean, here you see at least that that integral predator as at high pollen, the competition is not so important, so the predator prevails. Okay. Now the interesting thing is when you go to intermediate pollen supply. Okay. So intermediate pollen supply, the first one gives you that the integral prey will prevail, okay, because it's already some competition being strong, and then what you have at the B, that the prey is eliminated, and the predator will be eliminated because it cannot survive only on the resources. Same thing here at C, and at D they stopped at 30 because they know that the predator will have to decay, right? And here again, mutual elimination. In mutual elimination, there's only one figure where you have the integral prey really winning the competition, and the other mutual elimination, okay, which was not expected, okay. If you look at the closer at this, at the system and so on, which is not this one because there's no logistic growth and they have the chemostat thing. So you would not expect mutual elimination. Okay? You would expect that if competition is strong, the prey should actually prevail, and it's not. So then they went on to the lower pollen. Right? So what they find is that the A and B will correspond to mutual elimination, and C and D and this E really have the integral prey winning the competition at low pollen supply, because at low pollen supply the competition is very strong, and actually what you get mixed results. Sometimes you have mutual elimination, and sometimes you have prey winning the competition. Okay, so this is curious. So what could be happening here? We should maybe look at this one. So the integral prey will always start at 100, at 10, and this line here is they are separated. Okay? And the competition starts here. Okay? But see, when the competition starts, from one panel to the other, the populations of prey and predator here are not the same. So one thing is maybe it depends on the initial condition. So the initial condition here is a time, something like 8. Yeah? So because before there's no competition, no predation. Okay? So, and no competition either. So maybe the initial condition could be behind the result being mixed. And actually you can show this at least more or less. So that's a paper that I wrote with a student of mine on that. So what we did is to consider the model with a chemostat term. What? Yeah, okay. And we had all the results from the paper on mites. Okay? So we could estimate actually a lot of the parameters. Okay, but there's a lot of parameters in the parameter hell and so on. But here you have the parameters. It's a very controlled experiment. Okay, and the ones that we were in doubt, we asked the people, and they told us. So what you find is that the dynamics look something like this one. Okay, so you have a fixed point of coexistence, but when you start here, you have still first oscillations that will approach the equilibrium before getting to the equilibrium. You have oscillations, and the oscillations are such that they come very close to 0. Here's this inset. It is actually less than 1 individual. Right? Therefore, you have mutual elimination during transient. Okay, transient is what determines the outcome, not the fixed point. Okay? So you see, it's tricky when you get the theoretical results. Something you have to look, for instance, if the fixed point is biologically attainable. Okay? Could be that not. Right? Mike.
In this case, the population was eliminated, but if we started with a very large number of individuals, this.
Okay. Paradox of enrichment, yes. Very large number of individuals give you very large oscillations. So rather start with less. So we examined this. We looked for the initial conditions that would make the transient higher than a certain value. Okay, so we introduced an artificial threshold for which we put 1 individual. Okay, so if the transient has values that get below 1 individual, we say this is elimination. If this is a little bit arbitrary, you could say, but with 1 individual, maybe that's okay. It's not very. You could say the stochastic effects with small population could even with 1 individual could not be enough to survive. But anyhow, you have a threshold. Then you have initial conditions for intraguial prey, intraguial predation. Then you have to study this at different resource levels, and then you want to see when the fixed point can be attained without crashing during the transient. Okay? So when you do this, then you get the plot like this. For instance, this is at the initial conditions, and the gray region are the intraguild are the values of N0 and P0, the initial conditions for N and P, such that you can attain the fixed point without crashing, okay? And the actual shape of this depends on the value of the input of the resources, okay? So you have more resources in the second than in the first, and the gray region is larger here than here, and this is paradox of enrichment-like things. Okay, in rich environments, you get these oscillations that I showed you. They tend to be very large, and then they go super up and then close to zero. So then you have the collapse. So you see, this is the general things that the outcome of, okay, so this is also a good moment to discuss that you see what we get with simple model here, which has been parameterized. Okay, it's a condition that's not always obvious, but these people that did the experiment with the mice and so on and so forth, they know a lot about the parameters. Okay, I'm parameterized, but then okay, you have to be very, I mean, you have to be cautious about what will be the actual predictions. So we know that we have fixed points, and there's a regime where you have coexistence and fixed points, and they are stable and so on, but, well, sometimes you have to pay attention to the transients, and you have to look exactly, I mean, at the solutions were done numerically. So, okay, so what, I have something else here. Okay, that's all about integral predation. So, oh, that's not what I want to okay. There's also something which is interesting, which is this paper called Cats Protecting Birds. So this is inspired by the situation of islands, where you have some native birds, and if you introduce cats, feral cats, but I mean, felis catus, I mean, and then sometimes you get the elimination or complete elimination or a very strong effect on certain birds because they prey on the birds. Okay? But then there are some situations where the cats were first they were introduced to some rodents, okay, mouse essentially, okay, and they have a super strong effect on the birds also because they prey on the eggs. Okay? So then there's the possibility that you introduced the cat. Then you have cat, which could regulate the rodents, the mouse, and could benefit the bird. But the cat also preys on the bird. Okay, so you have a model. It's not just a simple food chain. Okay, it's more than this. So they wrote a model. If you want, I can give the. They did a very different modeling way. Okay, so in order to discuss this, that would take more time. Okay, but if you want, this is a paper that you can read in easily. With what you learned here, it's a paper that you can understand. You have all the elements, and so what would be this this modulus? Okay, so that's like that. Okay, so what you have is you have the cat. Okay, you have what they call the mesopredator, right? And you have the prey. Okay, both feed on this, and this one feeds on that. That's integral predation thing. Okay, so and but here to be more realistic than this kind of exercise, or more, that's a situation in the field where you don't have the controls that you have with your mites in the lab. Here, you have an intrinsic growth rate of the super predator, of the mesopredator, and of the prey, okay, which is not connected to this chain here. It means that the cat could feed maybe on something else, the mesopredator also on something else, and the prey, well, there has to feed on something, okay? So that you have a different situation. It's not the one that we discussed actually here, okay? But this here calls for caution with conservation management for these islands, because what happened is in many places the cats are eliminated. As the main conservation thing for the birds is usually elimination of cats, okay? Because but in particular there are some places, that was New Zealand, and I can't remember now the place, where you had the situations with this mesopredator, okay? So if you go and eliminate the super predator, and you say, okay, this will be good for the birds, it's actually not, okay? Because then the mesopredator is not regulated, and it's called mesopredator release. He's released from the predation that it's from the cats. So therefore, at the end, there are solutions to this here, where you see that the prey could be eliminated if we don't have the cat, because this one, the mesopredator, does not feed exclusively. It's a generalist, and it can eat all the birds, okay? or the birds of a certain species, and can feed on something else. So it is possible to have the elimination. Yeah? So they plotted some nice figures here, which summarize what they found. It depends a little bit on the parameters of what they found. The first one is the mesopredator and birds going to 0. Okay? I'm not saying that always will happen, but depends a little bit on the parameter value. But you have the kind of situation exists. Then you can have the coexistence of cats and birds. Right? Maybe the cat is not does not prefer the birds. Okay? Maybe that's something else. And then here you have the coexistence of 3. Okay? And here you have the 3, but the mesopredator can be eliminated, and then you have again the same equilibrium as before as there. Okay, so the cat is actually regulating the populations of both the birds and the mesopredator. Without the cat, you get this. At certain values of the parameters, okay, you have to explore all the values. There have lots of things, but this is just illustrative of the kind of situation that you would have in a, and this is trying to model things that people know happened in nature. They had this kind of effect, of counterintuitive effect of wildlife management, trying to restore, I mean, take an invasive species out. Okay. So, okay, I will share on Slack maybe these papers, okay, because they are easy to read. There's the paper about integrated predation also, there's the theoretical paper, then there's the experimental paper, and then there's our paper which uses the theory and tries to explain the experiment. So, as a last example, let us consider the situation where you have, and this is something that happened in Kenya. You have humans, you have cattle, you have zebras, and you have other ungulates. Others, not the zebras. Okay? So this is a region which obviously is it's occupied by humans. Therefore, it's not a pristine situation. Okay? And sometimes what happened there is that they defined certain areas which will be conserved, will be a reserve, and therefore they eliminate humans and cattle from that area, okay, to form a reserve, a wildlife reserve. And what was observed is that zebras went up and ungulates went down. Not eliminated, but the zebras kind of increased and ungulates decreased. So what explains this?
The zebras and the other ungulates are feeding on the same resources?
More or less. Okay. If it were, it's not competitive exclusion per se, because they have different several resources. Okay, but that could be an effect. That could be, but actually, I mean, we know it is something else. Okay, Mike.
I was thinking in the same example as we take as like a mesopredator release, we eliminate the superpredator with cattle, and we have a mesopredator release.
No, the cattle does not feed on zebras. Cattle is herbivorous. Have cows.
Yeah.
Well, they have humans, but humans don't feed on zebras. I mean, they feed on cattle.
Yeah, but humans were doing the work of a super predator by excluding the zebras and the other ungulates from an area where they were raising cattle, right? So
What?
they were driving the zebras and the other ungulates populations to a lower population size by excluding them from the areas where they raised their cattle, didn't they?
So, the cattle and the humans were eliminated from the thing, okay? So certainly the humans and the cattle have some importance in order to regulate this, okay? But there's no actual direct action of humans and cattle on zebras and ungulates, because this is, so between zebras and cattle, what do you expect? You expect some competition, because they are grazers and maybe they are competing. Cattle and zebra, maybe they're competing. Okay, but okay.
I was going to say that maybe the cattle was the biggest competitor and ate all, and then the zebras, without the cattle, they became a bigger competitive, and like there were no space for other ungulates to prevail.
Could be. Could be. But there's still something, well, okay, we know the story. Let me tell the story, because there's a secret species. Okay, so the relation with the humans and cattle, obviously humans feed on cattle, okay? But humans also protect the cattle, okay? So from what? From lions, and hyena. So when you have the humans, you're protecting this region here of cattle, and you are indirectly also making them go away, so they don't come where the human settlement is, and then everybody's protected. Okay, so the humans protect, although they consume the cattle. It's the strongest effect is that they protect them from the lions, and then indirectly also from the zebras and from the ungulates. Now, when you get out of them, you get lions with zebra and ungulates. So lions feed on both, and feed on both means that there's apparent competition. Okay? Remember, apparent competition. So they have apparent competition. And well, what happens in the field is actually that zebras have the tendency to form very large groups. And the effect of lions on very large groups, due to satiation and all of things we have discussed, is not so important. Okay? But on other ungulates that have smaller groups, or they are in smaller number, the effect on lions can be very important. Therefore, it's not that the zebras increase because they don't have any more the cattle to compete. And the effect on lions on the population of zebras is not very strong because there are so many. Okay? And then you have this this relation can be different than with the zebras, and this gets depleted. Okay? And zebras, okay. So that's also an unexpected effect of restoration. Let's say restoration project. Okay, so that happened in Kenya. And it's a classical example where this here is, if you didn't know the lions, because it was secret species, they seem to compete, as we already had said. Yeah, they compete and so on, but actually the driving force is the apparent competition due to the shared predator. Okay, okay, that's my computer.
I just wonder that maybe zebras and other ungulates have the same number in their populations, and maybe lions, they like the effect might not be lower in zebras because there are too many, but because lions prefer hunting on other ungulates that don't.
There could be preference. I don't know exactly in this case. Okay. Yeah. The description I saw is that the zebras have so many that the actual effect is not very important. Maybe it's this. Okay. So now you see, why do we discuss this community modulus? So we know that as with the case of two species dynamics, predator prey competition, so on, there's no two species dynamics really in nature unless you have laboratory conditions on either microorganisms or very small organisms. Okay? So in general, there's no two species dynamics, and in general, there's also not three species dynamics. Okay? But we know that competition between two species gives us a theoretical framework to think about coexistence and predator-prey relations. Gives us a framework we can think about how cycles appear and so on, and many things that maybe are not directly experimentally observable in the field, but gives us the framework to think about them. So the modulus is also something like that. All of this, you see, here, you had actually five species. And certainly there are other species around that also interact here. But you get this small modulus here, okay? And it appears here, and then it appears in many places. So this means that in other food webs or other webs, sometimes you have this kind of thing. And this here gives you also the framework to think about what happens if two species have a shared predator instead of a shared resource. So again, we have specific situations which are common even in much larger webs, food webs or competition webs or even mutualistic webs. Okay? But then sometimes you look at these webs, you see not only the species, two species interactions, and sometimes you see this modulus. And these modulus that I discussed today, they have been observed in many situations in real networks, in real webs, food webs, networks of interactions. Okay, so that's why this is a way to approach. This is one way of approaching the study of community ecology. This is the first step with small numbers of species, but thinking that they are somehow inside larger webs, and sometimes the effect you have this, for instance, these effects are dominant with relation to other things that are happening here, right? And then you have the importance of the modulus. Okay, that's why this is studied. Okay? These certain situations that have that are common in nature. Integral predation is also reasonably common in nature, and actually there's a little bit of theoretical problem also. That is, if you look for the actual, not only the necessary conditions for coexistence, but the actual conditions for existence, it's kind of small region of the parameter space in most of the cases. Then you say, okay, but how could it be that something which is possible but should not be very frequent is observed so frequently? Well, there can be many reasons, because there can be other interactions, but one of them, which is, has been studied, is that we didn't take into account here in the integral predation modulus the fact that maybe the species have different stages, like birds. Birds can fly, but they are also eggs. Okay, so this is different stages or different life history parts, and then when you do this, for instance, with some experiment with some other mites, okay? I'm not sure it's with mites, but okay, there was an experiment also with integral predation. I cannot remember now exactly. That you can have something like this. You have the resource, then you have the consumer 1, you have the consumer 2, and okay, this would say this is the N, which is the prey, and this is the predator. Okay? And that's the integral predation modulus, but it could be that maybe the prey is also able to feed on P. So, how could this be? Example. There, the mic.
That's very common in fishes. They have a larval stage, and they have some other fish that eat the larva, and then they grow, eat the fish that was.
Yeah, for instance, yes. That's so different stages, okay? They are larvae, they are preyed upon by some fishes, then they grow, and then they eat the fish. Okay? So different stages. Usually you'd say this in order to be more precise representation, you would, instead of doing this, you would say this, then you would say stage 1, stage 2, say that is it's eggs or larvae and so on, and then they become, this is not consumption here, okay? Then we become N2, which is the when they are adults, okay? And maybe then you can have something like this, okay? So actually, it's adults feeding on immature. Or could be also, okay, different. You could also have that the prey actually preys upon the predator at here, okay? At the larva state, for instance, okay? But this one preys here. And there are several possibilities here, okay? So, and these possibilities sometimes have a larger region of parameters where there is possible to have coexistence. Okay? Because this is kind of something stabilizing thing. Okay, so that's it for the community modulus. And okay, if you have more questions, otherwise we are done today. Questions? No. Okay, very good. So I will later share some of those papers, because then you can get more details on this whole story. Okay, so okay, see you tomorrow.